Not everyone was lying awake at night, biting their nails about the plight of kingless Britain. For many, this was the dawn of a new age. It's true, no one had foreseen this during the civil wars, but in giving them victory, the Almighty had shown them that Albion must be turned into Jerusalem. He had lain the Stuart kings in the dust. The only king to follow now was King Jesus, and the only true government, that of his saints.
Let them sing aloud upon their beds. Let the high praises of God be in their mouth, and a two-edged sword in their hand. Let the
The kingdom of God was at hand, the most blessed revolution of all, and no one was more convinced of this than Albion's holy warrior, Oliver Cromwell.
Religion was not at first the thing contended for, but God brought it to that issue at last, and at last it proved that which was most dear to us.
Cromwell called himself a seeker, and what he sought all his life was God's destiny for himself and for his country. At first, he'd been innocent of the Lord's design. For years, he'd just led the life of an obscure East Anglian country gentleman. Just as Cromwell was beginning to make his way in the world, some sort of crisis happened to his modest fortune. But what the world might have seen as misfortune was, through the cunning of the Almighty, his saving grace. He underwent some kind of religious conversion. The vanities were stripped away so he might be opened to the light.
Oh, I lived in and loved darkness and hated the light. This is true. I hated godliness, yet God had mercy on me. Oh, the riches of his mercy.
The sense that God had some special service for him made a new man of Cromwell. He knew where he was going. He knew what had to be done. What had to be done was to tear the sword out of the hands of the untrustworthy, papist-loving king. He went to war as a complete novice with no military experience whatsoever, but his sense of divine appointment was his armor. It made him supremely confident, cool under fire, but never reckless. An aura of invincibility began to cling to him. He became the driving force of the godly revolution. When the vanquished king defied God's judgment, his blood was needed to expiate the crime. But it became obvious that doing away with the monarch was no guarantee of doing away with the monarchy. For if Charles couldn't be among his subjects in person, his proxy could. The Greek word icon means both an image and a copy, and the icon Basilicae, the spitting image of the king, appeared within a week of his execution. It was an instant bestseller, going through 35 editions in a year, and it made Charles an imperishable martyr. A latter-day Christ, sacrificed for the sins of his people. Like Christ, Charles too would be resurrected, wearing his heavenly crown, and made flesh in the person of his son, Charles II, awaiting the call from exile in France. The poet John Milton, an ardent champion of the parliamentary commonwealth, was hired to attack the cult of the king martyr as so much wicked idolatry. To persuade the fearful and the gullible, they didn't need a Charles I. In fact, they didn't need any Stuart monarch. Look, he wanted to say, just stop worrying about the dead king. You're the sovereign now. Come to think of it, you've always been the sovereign. Kings have been yours, to hire or fire. But when Cromwell and Milton told the people that it was time for them to govern themselves. They didn't, of course, mean to be taken literally. What? Every jumped-up weaver or ploughman with some sixpenny book learning, announcing he'd just appointed himself the magistrate of mucking on the wold, granting himself the vote? Heaven forbid! That way lay chaos. No, the people should put the government of the state into the hands of the kind of men God saw fittest to exercise it, incorruptible men of substance and piety. "Oh, I see," said freeborn John Lilburne, the leveller, an ex-army officer who wanted to level the distance between the mighty and the humble, the rich and the poor. "You mean the same kind of people who got us into this mess in the first place." We've all known a John Lilburne, haven't we? Some of us have even been John Lilburne. First to the barricades, first to be arrested, won't shut up. But love him or hate him, you know he won't go away. To Squire Cromwell, he was a pain in the neck, a dangerous loudmouth, capable of wrecking discipline in the army. Lilburne, for his part, detested the new regime.
All you intended when you set us a-fighting was merely to unhorse and dismount our old riders and tyrants so that you might get up and ride in their stead.
The soldiers read Freeborn John and actually believed they should have a vote. Give them an inch and they'd take a mile. Pretty soon the men would start believing their officers were the tyrants Lilburne and the levellers said they were. They had to be stopped. An army was not, repeat not, a commune.
I tell you, you have no other way to deal with these men but to break them, or they will break you. Yea, and bring all the guilt of the blood and treasure shed and spent in this kingdom upon your heads and shoulders, and frustrate and make void all that work that with so many years' industry, toil and pains you have done. I tell you again, you are necessitated to break them.
Off to the tower went the leveller leaders, like so many traitors. But then something astounding happened. A petitioning campaign to demand the release of the levellers was mobilised in London by leveller women. Now for the Puritans, the cardinal virtues of women were silence and meekness. But these women were shameless, obstinate, loud-mouthed, and, it has to be admitted, brave. Leveller women had always been involved in the movement's political campaigns. Elizabeth Lilburne had been politicised through her efforts to spring her reckless husband from one prison or another. Mary Overton had been brutally punished for printing and distributing her husband's tracts, tied to the end of a cart and dragged through London streets with her 6-month-old baby pelted and abused like a common whore. But the most impassioned and articulate of the sisters was a woman called Catherine Chidley. She started as a charismatic preacher and turned to politics in an attempt to make the Commonwealth understand the particular sufferings of her sex.